Hello, welcome to Baltic World, the premier channel discussing news and important issues facing Northern, Central, and Eastern Europe. My name is Crispin, and as many of you will be aware, Russia has amassed troops along the Ukrainian border. Some 175,000 equipped and armed and poised for invasion are ready along Ukraine's eastern frontier. The United States has responded by trying to organize a package of measures that they may respond with should Russia invade. President Biden and Vladimir Putin have just concluded their 2-hour teleconference call. The first readouts are now online and available. I will go through the BBC report on it and then give my own analysis. Now, my view is grim. I am not impressed by the way the Biden administration has handled this. It, to me, speaks of staggering weakness, and if I was President Putin, I would be feeling deeply emboldened to invade during the later part of winter. That's my view. We will go into it in detail. In the meantime, if you find value in this discussion, please like and subscribe. Consider supporting us on Patreon, and let's get into it. So this is from the BBC, and it's titled, "Biden Warns Putin of Strong Measures Amid Ukraine Invasion Fears." The US says it is preparing strong economic and other measures over fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine after Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin spoke. In a video call, President Biden voiced worries over Russian troop buildups near the border with Ukraine and called for a de-escalation of tensions. Russia says it will not attack. President Putin accused Ukraine of provocation and sought guarantees against eastward NATO expansion and deployment of weapons close to Russia. More than 90,000 Russian troops are believed to be massed near Ukraine's borders. That's increased if you go to 300 kilometers. The movement has strained already tense relations between Russia and the US. After Tuesday's call, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the Biden administration was preparing specific, robust responses in the weeks ahead if they were required. The measures included economic sanctions and other actions such as additional troop deployments to NATO allies in the region and defense equipment for Ukraine. We'll come back to that. Mr. Sullivan refused to be drawn on what the economic measures might be, but he said Nord Stream 2, a new gas pipeline from Russia to Germany, which is not yet in operation, provided, quote, leverage for the US and its allies. Quote, if Vladimir Putin wants to see gas flow through that pipeline, he may not want to take the risk of invading Ukraine, he told journalists. Earlier reports said US officials had reached agreement with Germany to shut down the pipeline in the event of an invasion. Other possible measures include restrictions on Russia's banks, converting rubles into foreign currencies, or even disconnecting Russia from the SWIFT global financial payment system, reports say. Quote, things we did not do in 2014 we are prepared to do now, Mr. Sullivan added, referring to Western responses to Russia's annexation of Crimea. He also said there was a lot of give and take in the call and no finger wagging, but that President Biden was crystal clear where the United States stands on all of these issues. Video footage of the opening moments showed friendly greetings between the US and Russian leaders before the talks continued behind closed doors. The call was held on a secure video link set up under previous administrations, but never used before. President Putin spoke from his residence in the southern resort of Sochi, and President Biden from the White House. I'll keep going, still important. Russia seeks reliable guarantees. Meanwhile, a Kremlin statement said President Putin had stressed that Russia should not be held responsible for tensions because NATO was making, quote, dangerous attempts to take over Ukrainian territory and increasing its military potential on Russia's borders. Quote, therefore, Russia is seriously interested in getting reliable guarantees fixed in law to rule out the eastward expansion of NATO and the locations of countries neighboring Russia of offensive weapon systems. The White House said President Biden did not make any guarantees to limit NATO expansion. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that while the talks brought no sensations, he was grateful for President Biden's unwavering support. Ukrainian authorities have said Moscow could be planning a military offensive at the end of January although US officials say it is not yet clear whether President Putin has made a decision. Okay, we'll leave it there. There's a lot to unpack. First of all, the format. Video conference isn't great. However, President Putin did not attend the G20 summit earlier this year. Biden and Putin have not had an opportunity to meet face-to-face for some time, and the Americans did dispatch the CIA Director Burns to Moscow for direct talks over this specific issue. So it does still show a sense of taking it seriously, even though the optics of a teleconference aren't great. The fact that it ran for over 2 hours is also positive. It means that they likely got to substantive issues. But that's where my praise kind of ends. If we look at what Russia was seeking, a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, and a guarantee that the US wouldn't put offensive military capabilities in Russia's western periphery in NATO countries, so Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. This is completely outrageous. Now, from a practical point of view, the Ukraine is not on the brink of joining NATO. There is considerable reluctance to allow this in Germany, in France. The Americans themselves are aware of the potential implications of allowing Ukraine to join NATO. So while the rhetoric doesn't necessarily flow that way, and I'll get to that, there is no immediacy for Ukraine joining NATO. However, the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said many times that this isn't a matter for Russia to decide. This is a matter for the Ukrainian government. If the Ukrainians want to join NATO, then the NATO membership will help facilitate that aspiration. And so it's not even for the United States to decide. This has to be prompted by the Ukrainians themselves. And the Russians are not able to, from the perspective of the Secretary General, dictate what any country outside of its borders may or may not do, or any association that it wishes to be a part of. So the United States cannot publicly say that Ukraine will never join NATO, and cannot ever sign anything that would imply or give effect to that agreement. So if Russia is saying that the only thing that is going to deter us from invasion is a written guarantee that Ukraine can never join NATO, well, that isn't going to be on the table. And also, Russia has already significantly carved up Ukraine annexing Crimea and violated an agreement that was written down. If you go back to 1994, over 4,000 nuclear weapons were left over after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the Ukraine. Ukraine agreed to give it up in exchange for an express agreement that its territorial integrity would be respected by both parties, and clearly Russia violated that agreement. Instead, the Americans have talked about, and Jake Sullivan referred to this in particular, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is essentially an admission of defeat. The Americans were lobbying Germany against this pipeline since the beginning, since its inception. It's been a total impotent failure on the part of the Biden administration to get the Germans to shut this down. The Germans haven't. The pipeline, as mentioned in the article, isn't operational yet. So the best the Americans are saying is that if Russia invades Ukraine, it won't become operational. First of all, I find that very hard to believe. It might be delayed by some period of time, but given the amount of time and investment that have gone into it on both sides between Germany and Russia, eventually Germany will say, well, there's a new normal established. We're going to warm up our relationships. Perhaps they'll wait for President Putin to have a successor, and they'll have new diplomatic ties. Angela Merkel is leaving. There'll be a new German government. So this isn't a permanent agreement that could possibly arise. This will be something that might kick the can temporarily down the road without shutting down the pipeline. It also implies that if Russia doesn't invade Ukraine, America will cease its objections to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which strikes me as particularly bizarre given the level of dependence that this puts Europe under when it comes to Russian gas, greater than it already is. Which brings me to the next point. I mean, sure, the Germans may decide not to operationalize Nord Stream 2 in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, But then where is Europe going to get its gas? That is not clear at all, because much of Europe's gas supplies comes from Russia, and whether Nord Stream 2 is shut down or not, that will be an issue for the other pipelines that run through Belarus and elsewhere. Not clear what America plans to do about that. And then the other economic sort of things that have been tabled, cutting off from the SWIFT system, unable to transfer rubles into other currencies. I'm sure that right now Russian government officials are mapping that out. They're wargaming that situation. They're turning to China for support and how that might work to get around. And by the time Russia says go, and invades Ukraine, they'll be prepared for that eventuality and seek to minimize its financial impact. So these things have already been floated, and that gives Russia time, many months in fact, to come up with potential countermeasures. And then what isn't said is America actually defending Ukraine militarily. There is no discussion here that NATO will itself protect Ukrainian territory in the event of a Russian invasion. They will supply Ukraine with weapon systems and platforms, etc., in the event of an attack, but that will very likely be too little too late. So if I was Vladimir Putin, I would be looking at these things going, seems pretty trivial, certainly temporary, and not a great military risk for me. Why wouldn't I invade eastern Ukraine, given that any potential harms or blowback is going to be muted, and we will be able to bear those costs in exchange for the considerable prestige of expanding Russian territory to incorporate, Donetsk and those places, and be able to circumvent some of the harsher sanctions, relying on our Chinese allies and others. And thus, I think America is in a very kind of embarrassing situation. Now, here's what I would do, because it's easy for me to sort of sit here in an armchair and criticize. But as soon as these troops were amassing, and it was clear that Russia was providing non-answers about why those troops were there, then I would immediately be increasing my military deployments to Ukraine. I'd be massively surging the arms and equipment that were going in there. I'll be building new military bases in the Baltic countries, and then tell Russia, if you want these things to slow down, you will disband all troops from your western borders that are clearly poised for invasion, and then we will do the same. In other words, we won't be trading away the interests of our allies. We will be negotiating clearly from a position of strength and aggression, and say, look, if you're going to be aggressive towards us, we will respond in kind. Then we can talk. We will not be saying, for example, if you do not invade Ukraine, we will limit the amount of troops that we place in the Baltic countries, countries that we are legally obliged to defend and who are deeply vulnerable against any potential Russian attack. And that's actually my main fear in all of this, that in an effort to appease Vladimir Putin and say, look, if you don't invade, we won't increase our arms sales to Ukraine. We'll never sign a contract that says, Ukraine can't join NATO, but in practical effect, we won't allow that to happen. And we will limit any military deployment to our eastern allies in the Baltic, regardless of how vulnerable to Russian aggression that they happen to be. This is all, an amazing sense of capitulation. And essentially described by Jake Sullivan himself, saying there was a lot of give and take in the call. Now, Russia is the one that is altering the status quo. It is making a massive military surge on its eastern border, and America is essentially providing give and take in order to prevent Vladimir Putin from invading. This may not even work. If I'm Vladimir Putin and I'm looking at this embarrassing weakness on behalf of the United States and a deep reluctance to do anything about it on the part of Germany and France, why wouldn't I invade? Now, there are people with a backbone. The Poles, I've done a video on their massive military expansion. I think that they would take this extremely seriously. Lithuania has stood up and is being counted on the international sphere, particularly when it comes to Taiwan and China. They now speak with a considerable amount of moral authority in the United States, and will be able to call this out publicly in a way that could deeply embarrass the Biden administration. So there could be political consequences for this. Also, just in terms of recent history, Vladimir Putin would look at Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan with glee. It has deeply harmed American prestige around the world. Although strategically correct, you couldn't be in Afghanistan forever. The way in which that was done showed a depth of ineptitude that is completely risible. And of course, China's continued rise in East Asia means that America doesn't have the military ability to be everywhere all at once. So if it seeks to deter Russia, it needs to do so from a position of strength. This kind of sense of horse trading and making deals about the territorial integrity of countries that are sovereign nations that have already been threatened by Russia in the past is not a great idea and will only embolden Russia in the future, because why would they stop here? That's my view. I would love to hear your perspective. Am I being too harsh on the Biden administration? Do you think that this is just a pragmatic way to preserve strength and will be effective in deterring Russia? But come January, I have no confidence that what Biden has said thus far would prevent Vladimir Putin from military aggression in Ukraine. I'm sure Vladimir Putin is looking for any pretext on the part of the Ukrainian government to seize this territory. And at the moment, it looks like the responses would be fairly meek and at best temporary. That's my perspective. I would love to hear yours. Leave your comments down below. I will see you next time. Goodbye.